I'm not part of the climate change industry, so I'm not trying to push a particular agenda. I don't have some kind of body that I have to satisfy by putting out a certain kind of information a certain kind of way. I'm simply a researcher looking for the facts. The work that I started doing with Lang O'Rourke was to say, what are the drivers of change that will go into the future? One of those was climate change, and because I started to do the research into climate change, and then every time you open a box and you look inside, you realise there's a bit more that you need to know, so you take that out and you look inside another box, and so it goes on. I started to get a large body of knowledge about climate change and started to make sure that I understood climate change properly and that I'd checked my facts and I'd gone back to credible sources. One of the problems that we've got, not just in climate change, but all over the place, is that someone who really knows what they're doing and really knows what they're talking about can often look the same as someone who's completely ignorant and just got lots of rather poorly formed opinions. It's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between those two people. They can appear the same, they write articles in the same newspapers, and the popular places where we see them on the television and the newspapers being interviewed will treat those two as if they're equal. When you go into the academic press, where you say now the only way you can get into this press is by having proper pieces of work that are properly done, that have got proper statistics, that are thoroughly verified, and which have been looked at by your peers, and your peers have judged that you've done a proper job of creating a piece of science. When you get into that world, all the opinions and all the people who say climate change isn't real, they've all dropped off because they don't have that rigour behind them. They're just basically offering their opinion based on not an awful lot of evidence. I think we rather hope that because this seems to be a scientific kind of problem, that the people in the science community can find a way to solve that problem. And there really is no quick scientific fix. When I first started doing research, I thought, right, where are the big CO2 scrubbers that you can just build and put in the atmosphere and they'll suck CO2 in and turn it into something inert and pump out oxygen? Those things don't exist, or they do exist, but they're called trees, and we've got lots of them already. You can't make that kind of thing. Scientists can't make something that will remove greenhouse gases in any kind of sensible way at any kind of level. If we're putting 27 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year, and we know that carbon dioxide is a very potent warming agent, then we're just going to have to stop doing that. Personally, I've looked at some of the politicians who I thought were pretty impressive and been disappointed to realise that they did have this information, that they must have had reports in front of them that described climate change, that they were well aware of the emissions profile of the country that they were looking after, and the fact that they were continuing to produce more and more greenhouse gases in the certain knowledge that those greenhouse gases were having an adverse effect on the climate and on global warming. And yet they failed to act. We're just not very good at thinking far into the future. The way that we think and the way that we work is relatively short-term and medium-term. Most people don't have a long-term plan for themselves personally. A lot of businesses only have a relatively short-term plan, and then it disappears into some sort of vague hope as to what the future will bring. So I think the fact that we live in the moment is not unusual in terms of climate change. It's just the way that we are. And it's one of the challenges of climate change, because we have to start acting now when the problems are only just beginning to manifest themselves, to prevent a problem which will be really quite large and particularly troubling and, well, devastating potentially for the world, to prevent that problem which might be 20 or 30 years down the track. And that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to do, and that's one of the reasons why people are tempted to delay and say, let's wait until the problem is truly in front of us before we start to fix it. But if we wait for that moment to arrive, it is then too late to actually be able to solve the problem. I wish it wasn't true. I've searched for information that would convince me that it isn't true, that in fact things are going to be okay. But everything that I've seen, even the most conservative, the most sober, the most pared down estimate of what's going to happen in the future from the most conservative set of scientists that there are, even those predictions say that climate change is happening. It is happening irrevocably, so we will change a certain amount from where we are now. Quite how much we change is up to us, but if we don't start acting and we don't start putting some real amendments into the way in which we do things, we will find ourselves altering our world into a state where we don't really want to live in it quite so much anymore.